Imagine someone's life ending suddenly, leaving behind unfinished dreams, unanswered questions, and an emptiness where laughter and conversations once filled the air. That was the heartbreaking reality in Queensland, Australia in 2011. Li Ping-cha was a woman who had left behind everything she knew in search of a better life, hoping for happiness. But instead, she became the centre of a tragedy that would leave an entire community shaken. If you enjoy true crime stories like this and want to see more, please consider subscribing to my channel. It helps a lot, and I truly appreciate your support. Li was born in China on February 8, 1969. Not much is known about her early years. Those parts of her life remain a mystery. What were her childhood dreams? What kind of life did she imagine for herself? We may never know, but in 2005, she saw a glimmer of hope. She believed she had found love through the world of the internet. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to turn the page and begin a new chapter in her life. That love was with Klaus Andreas Kisake, a 65-year-old man living in Australia. Klaus had his own story, one filled with love, loss, and the search for companionship. He was born in Germany in 1943 and had been married to a woman named Monica since 1969. Together they raised a son, Ralph, and in 1982 they moved to Australia, building a life together. But in August 2005, Monica passed away from cancer. Her death left Klaus deeply lonely, and in his grief, he started looking for someone to share his life with again. That's how he met Li online. Their conversations gave him hope, and before long, he decided to take a chance. He booked a flight to China, hoping to meet the woman who had captured his attention. Their relationship moved quickly. In 2006, Klaus travelled to China, spending time with Li as they explored the country together. The moments they shared made it feel like they were building something real. By October of that same year, Li had packed up her life and moved to Australia to be with Klaus. Soon after, they were engaged, ready to start fresh together. But relationships like theirs often face judgment. People talk, make assumptions, and question the motives behind them. Some believe that older men seek younger Asian wives for financial or personal gain. Others assume that women like Li only marry for citizenship or a better life. Before the wedding, Klaus introduced Li to a friend in Sydney, possibly seeking reassurance. That friend, after speaking with a Chinese doctor, warned Klaus about the possibility that Li might be using him to secure residency and eventually bring her family to Australia. He strongly advised against the marriage. Klaus, however, chose to follow his heart. He believed in the love they shared and ignored the warnings. But even though he moved forward with the relationship, that conversation planted a seed of doubt in his mind, one that would never fully go away. On November 27, 2006, Klaus asked Li to sign a prenuptial agreement. The document made one thing clear. He had lingering fears. It stated that if she left him within 10 years, she would receive very little. But if she stayed until his death, she would inherit everything. There was no mention of his son in the agreement, showing how complicated their situation had already become. Despite this, the two got married in 2009, and Li received permanent residency in Australia. Klaus, now dealing with back pain, found that Li could officially be his full-time caregiver, allowing them to receive government support. To those who saw them from the outside, they looked like a happy couple. Klaus, who had more money, covered most of their expenses, making sure Li had a comfortable life. He even gave her access to his $130,000 bank account, something that showed a level of trust. He often praised her for how well she ran the household and even for allowing him to keep a shrine to his late wife in their bedroom. But beneath this seemingly stable life, something was brewing. Something that would soon shake their marriage to its core. Li had a secret, one she had kept from Klaus since the beginning. In 2010, she finally told him she had a son in China. And not only that, he was coming to live with them in Cairns the next day. Klaus was blindsided. This wasn't something they had discussed, and it felt like a betrayal. Li left the house when her son arrived, giving Klaus time to process the news. Hurt and unsure of what to do, Klaus confided in a mutual friend, telling him what had happened. When Li returned, she was furious. Klaus had made it clear, if she wanted to move back in, her son would have to return to China. That demand only made things worse. Eventually she did come back, but the damage was done. Their fights became more frequent, sometimes multiple times a week. The trust between them had crumbled. Then Klaus found out something that made him question everything. Lee had used his money to secure permanent residency for her son. He felt completely betrayed. The love they once had was disappearing, replaced by frustration, resentment, and anger. In 2011, Lee travelled back to China to visit her family, possibly to get some space from the problems at home. While she was gone, Klaus made a decision that would change everything. He started an affair. He met a woman named Da in a Cairns casino, a Thai woman who quickly became more than just a distraction. He told her he loved her, proposed marriage, and even gave her a diamond ring. It was reckless, desperate, and bound to collapse. When Da went back to Thailand, they stayed in touch, with Klaus sending her money. But in October 2011, Da found out Klaus was still married. She wasn't happy. She told him he had to end his marriage if he wanted to be with her. At the same time, Klaus and Lee's marriage was completely falling apart. They were arguing constantly, and things at home were tense. Then, in early November 2011, a neighbour noticed something strange in their yard. Patches of dead grass that hadn't been there before. It seemed odd. A few days later, those spots were covered with fresh grass, as if someone had been trying to hide something. On November 7th, another strange thing happened. The same neighbour saw Klaus outside, spending an unusual amount of time hosing down the gutter. It wasn't something he had ever done before. It felt out of place. Around that time, friends started getting worried because they hadn't heard from Lee. Concerned, they called the house. Klaus picked up and gave them an odd explanation. He said Lee had accused him of having a new girlfriend and HIV, and after an argument she left in the middle of the night. He claimed he hadn't seen her since, but something about his story didn't feel right. A friend named Mr. Noble decided to visit Klaus. When he arrived, he noticed something. Klaus had a bloody lip. When asked about it, Klaus brushed it off, saying it was just an ulcer. He also repeated the same story, that Lee had left with another man and probably returned to China. But the more he talked, the less believable his story became. Details weren't adding up. As the days passed and Lee didn't return, the worry among her friends grew stronger. They kept calling her, hoping for some sign that she was okay, but every call went unanswered. The silence was enough to confirm their worst fears. Something terrible had happened. Klaus and Lee's friends started talking amongst themselves, and soon concerns started growing. One of them pointed out that they had seen scratch marks on Klaus's face around the time Lee disappeared. The more they thought about it, the more uneasy they felt. Something just didn't seem right, and they were starting to fear the worst. Worried that something terrible might have happened to Lee and that Klaus could be involved, they decided they had to act. On November 9th, 2011, they went to the police and reported their concerns. The last time anyone had seen Lee was around October 29th. The police wasted no time. Officers were sent to Klaus's house to question him about Lee's whereabouts. Klaus stuck to his story but added something new. He claimed that Lee had asked for a divorce and wanted half of his house. Other than that, he insisted he had no idea where she was. But as the officers stood there listening to him, they noticed something strange. There was a strong chemical smell lingering in the air, especially in the garage. It was enough to raise suspicions. Investigators were brought in, and a full missing persons case was opened. One of the first things they did was check Lee's safety deposit box at the bank. Inside, they found important documents, jewellery, and $3,600 in cash. If Lee had really left on her own, why would she leave all these things behind? It didn't make sense. The police now had serious reasons to believe that something bad had happened to her. They tried to reach Lee multiple times, but every attempt failed. That's when things started to look even worse. The investigator in charge began keeping an eye on Klaus and his home. He started noticing odd details, large patches of dead grass in the yard that had been covered up with fresh turf, and something unusual in the garden bed, a strange white fatty substance on the surface. The deeper they dug, the more suspicious it all became. They also discovered that Klaus had recently bought a strong acid. Meanwhile, in Cairns, a small town where news travels fast, rumours started flying. People whispered that an old man had killed his wife, and soon, Klaus felt the need to address the media.
I'm German-born, living in Australia since 29 years. And what else can I tell you? So.
And you're Liping's
sorry, yeah, I'm Liping's husband, yes.
And how long have you been together?
Since November 2006. We married in 2006, yes.
2006?
Yes, 2006, yes.
You married again?
And
So
then,
do you think she may be with someone else?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I cannot say this. So
How are you feeling about this?
it's shitty. Believe me. I got it 2 times before, and now the 3rd times. It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
at the moment, the 2 first times, as I said, I contacted her. She contacted me, so came together. But now, she did not contact me. I contacted her twice or 3 times. I tried on her mobile phone. No one of her friends I know of know her or know where she is. So, but this is the photo of Liping.
And how old is she? Is she 42?
And Liping is a very, 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 very nice looking lady, as you can see. And I was glad to have, with my age, such a young, nice lady. She is 42 years of age, yes. She is a very clean lady. The only thing what this lady is, eccentric, rebellious, and willpower.
During his TV interview, Klaus acted in a way that made people even more suspicious. He was smiling, a reaction that seemed completely out of place. And when asked about his connection to Lee, he didn't even mention that he was her husband. A journalist had to remind him. This odd behaviour only fueled speculation that he might actually have something to do with Lee's disappearance. Then, on November 20th, 2011, the police brought Klaus in for questioning. He answered every question with confidence, denying any wrongdoing. As for the acid, he claimed it was for his swimming pool. But while he was being questioned, a forensic team was sent to his home to search for evidence. Forensic officers checked the drains on Klaus's property and made a shocking discovery: a set of 6 porcelain teeth. They were later confirmed to belong to Lee. Then, as they sifted through gravel from a nearby storm drain, they found 2 human teeth, also identified as Lee's. The investigation didn't stop there. Inside the house, they found something eerie in the bedroom, a shrine dedicated to Klaus's first wife. Next to it was an urn containing her ashes. But when they examined the urn more closely, they found something that didn't belong: a mobile phone buried in the ashes. It was Lee's. This was enough to arrest Klaus. The police pressed him to tell the truth, and finally, he began to talk. According to Klaus, here's what happened. On the morning of October 29th, 2011, Lee saw emails he had been exchanging with a new Thai girlfriend named Da. She confronted him, accusing him of cheating. Klaus denied it and quickly deleted the emails, but it was too late. Lee had already seen them. She then pointed at a sore on his lip and accused him of having AIDS. Furious, Klaus snapped back, accusing Lee of having a boyfriend in China. The argument escalated quickly, with both shouting at each other. Klaus claimed that Lee demanded half of his house. At some point, according to him, Lee reached out and scratched his face. She then grabbed a kitchen fork and attacked him, cutting his finger in the process. Klaus said he pushed her away in self-defense, and then turned around to grab a towel to wipe the blood from his hand. That's when he heard a loud thud. When he looked back, Lee was lying on the ground. Klaus claimed that he told her to get up and asked if she was okay, but she didn't respond. Then he noticed blood coming from her ears. He checked for a pulse but found nothing. He said he wanted to call emergency services, but in his words, it was too late. They couldn't help her anymore. According to Klaus, Lee had hit her head when she fell, and that's what killed her. He insisted that it wasn't intentional. It was just a tragic accident. But instead of reporting what happened, Klaus made a chilling decision. After Lee died, Klaus left the house, got himself some ice cream, then came back and went to bed while her body remained on the kitchen floor. The next morning he woke up, shaved, showered and got dressed before walking back into the kitchen. Seeing her body still there, he said he panicked and decided to get rid of her to avoid any consequences. Instead of calling for help, he chose a much darker path. Investigators believe that Klaus got the idea for what he did next from an episode of Breaking Bad. He dragged Lee's body into a yellow wheelie bin in his garage. Then, he went out and bought a large amount of hydrochloric acid. Over the next few days, he used it to dissolve her remains. As her body broke down, he washed away the smaller pieces down a drain. Any larger pieces, well, no one knows exactly where those went. Klaus carried on with his normal life, going to bed every night while his wife's remains were dissolving just a few feet away. Once he was done, he packed up Lee's clothes and shoes and dropped them into different charity bins. Then he began telling everyone, including the police, that Lee had gone back to China and that he had no idea where she was. Klaus finally admitted to killing Lee, saying it happened on October 30th, 2011. He also confessed that he had lied to the police before to avoid getting caught. But even with his confession, investigators weren't convinced he was telling the full truth. They suspected that there was more to the story, something much worse, and they were determined to uncover it and make sure Klaus faced justice. They soon found out about Klaus's other Thai girlfriend Da, the one I mentioned earlier. When investigators checked his email exchanges with her, they uncovered what could be a possible motive. The emails showed that Klaus and Da had a close, affectionate relationship, constantly expressing love for each other. But there was something else. Repeated mentions of a problem that he needed to take care of as soon as possible. That problem was clearly Lee. It seemed like Klaus saw Lee as an obstacle standing in the way of his new relationship, and he was determined to remove her. One email sent just a day before Lee died on October the 29th, 2011 read, "The other person tried to give me a hard time, but I don't care. She is the worst person in my life." Then, on October 31st, 2011, the very next day after Lee's death, Klaus sent another message to Dia. "I have good news for you. The other person has finally left the house. She told me she wants to go back to China. But I don't care anyway because the house is now free for the both of us and you can come to me any day you like." While he was sending that email, Lee's body was literally dissolving inside his home. Does this sound like the reaction of a man who accidentally killed his wife? To investigators, this was the behaviour of someone cold and calculated. And then, they found something even more damning. Evidence proving that Klaus had bought the acid before Lee died, not after, as he had claimed. This wasn't just about covering up a mistake. This pointed to planning. Now, they had both a motive and solid proof that Lee's death was no accident. It was murder. The trial began in 2013 at the Cairns Supreme Court. The prosecution laid out the evidence clearly. Klaus had bought a large quantity of acid before Lee died, and not just a little, way more than anyone would ever need for household use. This made it obvious that he had planned to use it to get rid of her body. Witnesses, including people who knew the couple, spoke about their constant arguments. Lee had been wanting to leave Klaus and return to China, and she intended to take some of his assets with her. This would have meant financial loss for Klaus, or at the very least a messy, drawn-out divorce. And then there was his behaviour after Lee disappeared. His lies about her whereabouts, the destruction of evidence, and, of course, the horrifying way he got rid of her body. Everything pointed to murder, not an accident. The prosecution also pointed out Klaus's odd behaviour following Lee's disappearance. He didn't seem upset at all. In fact, after killing Lee, he casually went for a walk by the seafront in Cairns and even bought himself an ice cream. And then there was the TV interview. After dissolving his wife in acid and disposing of her remains, he appeared on camera holding up a smiling photo of Lee, acting like a grieving husband. To many, this looked like he was enjoying fooling everyone, thinking he had pulled off the perfect crime. Even with all this evidence against him, Klaus still tried to insist that Lee's death was an accident. But he had nothing to back up his claim. The jury didn't buy it. After reviewing everything, they reached a unanimous verdict. Klaus was guilty of murder. In December 2013, he was sentenced to life in prison, which is quite rare in Australia. One major reason for this is Queensland's no body, no parole law. This law makes it impossible for Klaus to be released unless he reveals where Lee's remains are. But given what he did to her, it's unlikely that he'll ever tell the truth. If he does, it might expose that what really happened to Lee was even worse than what he originally admitted. Since his conviction, Klaus has tried multiple times to get out of prison. He's filed 2 appeals, one to the Queensland Court of Appeal and another to the High Court of Australia. Both were denied. Today, Klaus is about 82 years old, and with no chance of parole, it's likely that he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars.